Here is the full narration-only script for the story of citrus fruits in history, clean, no stage directions, no timestamps, no production notes, just the words to be spoken. 2 million sailors died from it. Not from battle, not from storms, not from the monsters that ancient mariners imagined lurked beyond the edge of the known world. They died from a lack of fruit. They died because no one on their ship had eaten a lemon in weeks. They died from scurvy, one of the most agonizing, preventable, and misunderstood diseases in human history. A disease caused simply by the absence of a vitamin that a single orange could have provided. Their teeth fell out, their old wounds reopened, their bones softened, their minds clouded, and then they died slowly on ships full of men who had no idea what was happening to them or why. This is not ancient history. This is the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, the age of exploration, the age when Europe was sending fleets across every ocean to build empires and accumulate wealth. The age when the world was being mapped, conquered, and connected. And the single greatest killer of the men doing the connecting was not the sea, not foreign armies, not unfamiliar diseases. It was the absence of citrus fruit. The lemon, the lime, the orange, the grapefruit. These fruits, ordinary, cheap, ubiquitous, sitting in a bowl on your kitchen counter, these fruits changed the course of human history so profoundly, so directly that without them, the modern world as we know it might not exist. And here is what makes it devastating. People knew for decades, for centuries, there was evidence, clear, practical, undeniable evidence that citrus prevented scurvy. And they ignored it. Over and over and over again. How does a civilization ignore a cure it already has? That is the question this story is really asking. And the answer will teach you something about knowledge, about power, and about the extraordinary gap between what human beings know and what human beings choose to act on. Before we get to the sailors and the ships and the disease that shaped empires, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to where citrus actually comes from. Because the answer is not where most people expect. When you think of citrus, you probably think of the Mediterranean, orange groves in Spain, lemon trees in Sicily, the sun-drenched coast of the Amalfi Peninsula. Or you might think of Florida, California, Brazil, the great commercial citrus-producing regions of the modern world. None of these places are where citrus originated. Citrus began in the mountains. Specifically in a region that genetic studies have now identified with remarkable precision, the eastern foothills of the Himalayas, the region where modern-day northeastern India, Myanmar, and the Yunnan province of southern China converge. In this region, warm, humid, with rich mountain soils and dramatic seasonal variation, a handful of original citrus species evolved over millions of years. Botanists believe there are only a small number of true original citrus species. The citron, the pomelo, the mandarin, perhaps the papeda, a wild citrus species with thick, bitter skin. Every other citrus fruit you have ever eaten, the lemon, the lime, the orange, the grapefruit, the tangerine, the clementine, the blood orange, the Mayer lemon, the yuzu, every single one is a hybrid or a descendant of hybrids derived from those original few. The orange, for example, is a hybrid of the pomelo and the mandarin. The lemon is a hybrid of the citron and a sour orange. The grapefruit is a relatively recent hybrid of the pomelo and the sweet orange, and it was first described in the Caribbean in the 18th century. The entire family of citrus fruits that now feeds and flavors and perfumes the world was assembled over thousands of years from just a few mountain plants. And it was human beings who assembled it. The history of citrus is, from very early on, a history of human intervention, of cultivation, of selection, of trade, of carrying seeds and cuttings across mountains and deserts and oceans. The citrus family is a human creation almost as much as it is a natural one. The first recorded cultivation of citrus appears in China. The Tributes of Yu, an ancient Chinese geographic and administrative text, parts of which may date to around 2000 BCE, mentions mandarin oranges and pomelos being sent as tribute to the imperial court from the provinces of what are now Hunan and Jiangxi. This is the earliest documentary evidence we have of organized citrus cultivation, of people deliberately growing citrus trees, tending them, and using them in economic and political systems. Chinese civilization had a relationship with citrus for 4,000 years before the first orange tree appeared in Europe. The Mandarin, which takes its English name from the Mandarin officials of the Chinese imperial court, who wore robes of a similar orange color, was the central citrus fruit of early Chinese culture. It was eaten, its peel was dried and used medicinally. Its fragrance was considered calming and health-promoting. At the Lunar New Year, mandarins and tangerines were and still are given as gifts, symbolizing good fortune and prosperity. The number 2 is significant here. 2 mandarins are traditionally given together because the word for mandarin in Cantonese sounds similar to the word for gold, 2 pieces of gold, a wish for wealth and abundance for the new year. This tradition has continued unbroken for thousands of years. When Chinese immigrants brought the Lunar New Year celebration to the United States, to Australia, to Southeast Asia, to wherever they settled, they brought the mandarin with them as a symbol of blessing and prosperity. The citrus fruit as cultural ambassador, carrying meaning across oceans. From China, citrus moved west. But not directly, not quickly. The movement of citrus across Asia and into the Middle East and Mediterranean happened through multiple routes and over many centuries. The first citrus fruit to reach the Western world was the citron. The citron, Citrus medica, is a large, bumpy, thick-skinned fruit that is mostly pith with very little flesh or juice. It looks somewhat like a lumpy, elongated lemon. It is not particularly good eating. But it smells extraordinary. The citron produces an intense, complex fragrance from its thick skin and from its essential oils. In the ancient world, before synthetic perfumes, before the global spice trade, before most of what we now consider normal fragrant materials were available, the citron was one of the most intensely fragrant natural substances anyone had encountered. It was used as a perfume, placed in clothes chests to scent fabric, carried as a personal fragrant object the way we might carry a scented sachet. And it became religiously significant. In Jewish tradition, the citron, known in Hebrew as the etrog, is one of the 4 species used in the celebration of Sukkot, the autumn harvest festival. The etrog is held in the left hand together with a palm branch, myrtle, and willow, and waved in 6 directions as part of the holiday ritual. The requirement that the etrog be unblemished, perfect, without spots or irregularities, created one of the most demanding standards of perfection in any religious practice connected to food. The care with which etrogim are grown and selected, the expertise required to cultivate a ritually perfect fruit, is extraordinary. A single perfect etrog for ritual use can sell for hundreds of dollars. This tradition has been maintained for more than 2,000 years. Citron groves cultivated specifically for religious purposes still operate in southern Italy, in the region of Calabria, where Jewish communities established etrog cultivation centuries ago. The citrus fruit as spiritual object, as a vehicle for the sacred. The Persian Empire moved citrus westward. The Persians were extraordinary horticulturalists. Their concept of the paradise garden, paradisa in Old Persian, from which we get the English word paradise, was a walled garden of extraordinary beauty, containing the finest fruits, flowers, and plants from across the known world. Persian paradise gardens were statements of imperial power. The ability to collect and cultivate plants from distant regions demonstrated both wealth and dominion. Citrus, with its beauty, its fragrance, its exotic origin in the distant East, was a prized element of these gardens. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in the 330s BCE, his armies encountered citrus in Persian gardens and brought knowledge of it westward into the Mediterranean world. The Greeks and Romans were fascinated by the citron. They grew it as an ornamental plant, a garden curiosity. They used it as a perfume and a medicinal. But they did not eat it widely. The citron's flesh is too thick, too dry, too pith-heavy to be pleasant as a food. The Romans did develop the first true citrus horticulture in Europe. They grew citron trees in gardens and eventually in early greenhouse-like structures. There is evidence from Pompeii, the city preserved by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE, of citrus trees cultivated in garden spaces. But citrus did not become truly widespread in Europe until the Arab expansion of the 7th and 8th centuries brought new varieties, new cultivation techniques, and a genuine culture of citrus consumption westward. The Arab contribution to the story of citrus is enormous and largely unacknowledged in popular history. When Arab civilization expanded out of the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century CE, it connected the citrus-rich regions of the East, India, Persia, East Africa, with the Mediterranean world. Arab traders, scholars, and settlers carried citrus cultivation westward with extraordinary intentionality. The sour orange, Citrus aurantium, arrived in the Mediterranean world through Arab trade routes, probably reaching Spain and Sicily by the 10th century. The lemon followed, the lime followed. Arab agricultural science, which was among the most advanced in the medieval world, developed sophisticated irrigation systems, cultivation techniques, and understanding of soil conditions that made it possible to grow citrus in the drier, hotter conditions of Spain and North Africa. The great Islamic gardens of Spain, the Alhambra in Granada, the gardens of Córdoba featured citrus trees prominently. Orange trees became so characteristic of Andalusian gardens that the Patio de los Naranjos, the Court of the Orange Trees, became one of the most iconic architectural spaces in Spain. When you walk through the courtyard of the Mosque Cathedral of Córdoba today, with its rows of orange trees, their roots cooling in the channels of running water that Arab engineers designed 1,000 years ago, you are experiencing a direct physical inheritance from the Arab cultivation of citrus in medieval Europe. The Arabic influence on citrus culture runs deep into European language as well. The word orange comes through Old French from the Arabic naranj, which came from the Persian narang, which may have come from Sanskrit naranga. The linguistic chain traces the fruit's westward journey through culture after culture. The word lemon comes from the Arabic layman or liman. Lime comes from the Arabic lima. Every time an English speaker says the word orange, they are speaking a word that traveled from Sanskrit through Persian through Arabic through Spanish and French before arriving in English. The history of citrus is embedded in the words we use for it. Now we arrive at a moment that most people treat as a minor footnote of history, but that deserves far more attention. The year is 1497. Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese explorer, is about to sail from Lisbon on the first European voyage to reach India by sea, rounding the southern tip of Africa at the Cape of Good Hope and crossing the Indian Ocean. This voyage will open the direct sea route between Europe and Asia. It will eventually end the Arab dominance of the spice trade. It will reshape global economics and lead directly to the modern world economy. It will also kill 100 of da Gama's 170 sailors. They die from scurvy. They die from the absence of citrus. Here is what is extraordinary about this moment. At the ports of East Africa where da Gama stopped on his journey, local populations offered the Portuguese sailors oranges. They ate them, their symptoms improved dramatically. Da Gama and his officers noticed this. They wrote about it. The connection between citrus and health improvement was, at some level, observed. And yet, the knowledge was not systematically applied, the solution was not institutionalized. The next Portuguese fleet to make the same voyage experienced the same deaths from the same cause. This pattern, observation, temporary application, institutional forgetting, would repeat itself for another 250 years. A litany of near misses and collective negligence that would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Why? To understand why the citrus solution to scurvy was ignored for so long, you have to understand how knowledge worked in the pre-scientific era. Knowledge was not organized the way we organize it today. There was no systematic process for taking an observation, citrus prevents scurvy, and testing it, confirming it, and distributing it as standard practice. There were logbooks, there were medical treatises, there were letters between ship surgeons. But there was no mechanism for connecting them, no institution whose job was to synthesize practical knowledge from thousands of sea voyages and produce universal guidelines. And there was something else, something more insidious. Theory. In the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, medical theory was dominated by the humoral model, the ancient Greek framework that understood health as the balance of four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Under this framework, scurvy was explained as an imbalance of humors, specifically as an excess of cold and moist humors, typically caused by the cold, wet conditions of sea life. The treatment, logically from within this framework, should be warming and drying, hot foods, dry air, warming medicines. This theory was wrong, completely catastrophically wrong. But it was internally consistent. It had the authority of 2,000 years of medical tradition behind it. The physicians who promoted it were not stupid men. They were following the best theoretical framework available to them. And when practical sailors and ship's surgeons reported that citrus seemed to help, that men who ate oranges recovered from scurvy while men who did not died, the medical establishment had a ready explanation. The citrus worked not because of some specific property in the fruit, but because it happened to be warming and stimulating. It was a coincidence. It worked within the framework. This meant the knowledge could never properly challenge the theory, because every time it appeared, it was absorbed into the theory and reinterpreted. The practical, empirical observation this works was repeatedly subordinated to the theoretical explanation. This is why it works, and the why is wrong. The result was that the cure existed, was rediscovered multiple times, and was never properly implemented. The most famous failed rediscovery happened in 1601. James Lancaster, an English captain on the first voyage of the newly chartered East India Company, conducted what was essentially an accidental clinical trial. He gave the sailors on his own ship 3 teaspoons of lemon juice every day as a preventive measure. He had observed citrus working on previous voyages and decided to apply it systematically. The sailors on his ship remained healthy throughout the voyage. The sailors on the 3 other ships in the convoy who received no lemon juice suffered severely from scurvy. Some died. At the end of the voyage, Lancaster was able to transfer healthy sailors from his ship to the others to help navigate them home. The evidence could not have been clearer. And yet, the East India Company did not adopt citrus provisioning as standard practice. Lancaster's result was noted. It was not acted upon. The voyage records sat in the company's archives. The sailors on the next voyage got scurvy. This is not unusual in the history of medical knowledge. It is, in fact, the rule. The gap between knowing something and implementing it systematically is one of the most consistent and devastating features of human institutions. We know and we do not do. We observe and we do not change. The definitive scientific proof came in 1747. James Lind, a Scottish naval surgeon serving on HMS Salisbury, conducted what is now recognized as one of the first controlled clinical trials in the history of medicine. He selected 12 sailors suffering from scurvy. He divided them into 6 pairs. Each pair received a different treatment. Some received cider, some received diluted sulfuric acid, some received vinegar, some received seawater, some received a mixture of nutmeg, garlic, and other spices, and 2 received 2 oranges and 1 lemon each day. The results were dramatic and unambiguous. The 2 sailors who received citrus were the only ones to recover fully. Within 6 days, one was fit for duty. The other had recovered enough to nurse the remaining 10 sailors. Lind had proven it definitively, beyond any reasonable doubt. He published his findings in his treatise on the scurvy in 1753. And for 40 years, the British Royal Navy did nothing about it. 40 years. James Lind had proven that citrus prevented scurvy in 1747. The British Navy did not issue the order making lemon juice standard provision for all ships until 1795. In those 48 years, it is estimated that the Royal Navy lost more sailors to scurvy than to battle. More men died from the absence of a lemon than from cannon fire. This is one of the most haunting statistics in the history of medicine. And it did not happen because people were cruel or deliberately negligent. It happened because institutions are slow, because theory resists practice, because the people who make decisions and the people who have knowledge are rarely the same people. Because changing standard procedure requires navigating bureaucracy and overcoming inertia and challenging the authority of those who have invested their careers in the existing approach. It happened because we are human. When the British Navy finally adopted lemon juice in 1795, the transformation was immediate and remarkable. Scurvy, which had been a constant, devastating presence on every long voyage, essentially disappeared from the Royal Navy within a decade. The practical benefit was staggering. Ships could now remain at sea longer, crews remained healthy throughout extended voyages, naval operations that would previously have been impossible became routine. The timing was, historically speaking, critical. The Napoleonic Wars were about to begin. Britain and France would fight for dominance of Europe and the seas for the next 2 decades. The British Navy, now with healthy, scurvy-free crews, had a profound strategic advantage over the French Navy, whose ships were still suffering from scurvy and other preventable diseases. The naval dominance that Britain established in the Napoleonic era, culminating in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, was built partly on the foundation of lemon juice. The British Empire, which would grow to cover a quarter of the Earth's surface, was built on many things: naval power, industrial capacity, colonial aggression, and lime juice. The British sailors, who became known as limeys, a term that was originally a mild insult from American sailors who noticed the British practice of carrying limes, were healthier, more reliable, and more capable of extended operations because of citrus. The derisive nickname became, unintentionally, a testament to a medical breakthrough that changed the balance of world power. But now the story takes another turn, a darker one. Because the British Navy's adoption of lime juice instead of lemon juice, a practical substitution made for reasons of colonial supply logistics, created a new problem that would not become apparent for another century. West Indian limes, which were cheaper and more easily available to the British Navy through its Caribbean colonial holdings, contained significantly less vitamin C than Mediterranean lemons. The British had replaced a highly effective citrus with a less effective one, and for a while, at lower doses, it still worked, enough vitamin C to prevent the most acute scurvy. But when the British began exploring the Arctic, the great 19th century expeditions to find the Northwest Passage, the lower vitamin C content of the lime rations, combined with the extraordinary demands of Arctic conditions, was not enough. Scurvy returned. And this time, it returned with an additional complication. The expeditions had tinned food, a relatively new technology, and they trusted it. The problem was that the canning process, as practiced in the 19th century, destroyed the vitamin C in the preserved foods. The Arctic explorers had preserved food that contained no vitamin C, they had lime juice that contained less vitamin C than it should, and they had limited access to fresh food of any kind. The result was catastrophe. The most infamous was the Franklin expedition of 1845, 129 men, 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, sent to chart the Northwest Passage. They disappeared. Search parties found evidence over the following decades of the expedition's terrible end: scurvy, starvation, likely exposure. The ships were eventually found by underwater archaeology in 2014 and 2016. The British, who had believed they had solved scurvy 60 years earlier, were facing it again, because they had substituted the wrong citrus, because they trusted technology that failed them, because they forgot that the solution to a problem requires understanding why it works, not just that it works. They knew limes prevented scurvy. They did not understand that vitamin C was the active compound and that different sources contained different amounts. They could not have understood vitamin C would not be isolated and identified until 1932. They were applying a solution they did not understand to a problem whose mechanism they had not grasped. And when conditions changed, when the Arctic cold and the canning process and the weaker limes combined in a way no one had anticipated, the solution failed. This is the permanent risk of applying knowledge without understanding. You can follow the correct procedure and still miss the point. Let us step back from the ships and the expeditions for a moment. Let us talk about what was happening to citrus in the centuries while all of this naval history was unfolding. Because while European navies were figuring out how to keep their sailors alive, citrus was doing something else entirely. It was becoming one of the most economically and culturally significant crops in the world. The orange had arrived in Europe through Arab trade by around the 10th century. Initially, it was the sour orange, Citrus aurantium, used primarily for its fragrant peel, its juice as a food preservative, and its flowers for perfume. Orange flower water, distilled from the blossoms of the sour orange, became one of the most important flavoring agents in European and Middle Eastern cuisine. It appears in recipes going back centuries. The sour orange's peel was candied, preserved, and used in confectionery. But the sour orange was not the eating orange we know today. The sweet orange, the one you peel and eat, arrived in Europe later, brought by Portuguese traders from China and India in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. And the sweet orange was transformative. It was immediately popular in a way that few foods have ever been: sweet, juicy, aromatic, visually beautiful. It required no cooking, it could be eaten immediately. It was like nothing Europe had encountered before. Within a century of the sweet orange's arrival, wealthy Europeans were obsessed with it. The orange became one of the great luxury status symbols of the 16th and 17th centuries. And nowhere was this obsession more extravagant than in France. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the most powerful monarch in Europe, was, among many other things, a devoted orange enthusiast. Versailles had orangeries, purpose-built greenhouse structures designed specifically to protect orange trees through the cold French winters. The Great Orangery at Versailles, designed by the architect Jules Hardouin-Mansart and completed in 1686, was not a garden ornament. It was a statement of absolute power. The ability to grow orange trees in northern France to defeat the climate through architecture and technology demonstrated that the King of France could impose his will even on nature. Louis had over 3,000 orange trees in the Versailles Orangery. Some of those trees had been growing for more than a century when Louis acquired them. They were living treasures, symbols of wealth and power as significant as the gold and silver in the royal treasury. The orangery became a model replicated across European royal courts. Every monarch who aspired to Louis' status needed one. Growing oranges was not just horticulture, it was politics. The orange tree as a symbol of royal power appears in portraits, in heraldry, in the decorative arts of the 17th century. The orange was simultaneously exotic and familiar, wild and controlled, natural and aristocratic. The wealthy ate oranges at the table. They perfumed their rooms with orange flowers. They carried pomanders, oranges studded with cloves, as personal fragrant objects that also, they believed, protected against disease. The orange was everywhere in aristocratic European culture. And then slowly it moved down the social scale. As trade routes developed and production increased, oranges became more affordable. By the 18th century, they were being sold in city markets across Europe. By the 19th century, they were available to the working class, at least occasionally. The transformation from royal luxury to everyday fruit happened over about 3 centuries. The industrialization of citrus began in the 19th century and transformed the global economy in ways that are still playing out. The key development was the realization that citrus could be grown at enormous scale in specific climates that closely matched the Mediterranean conditions it required. Warm, frost-free winters, hot, dry summers, well-drained soils, reliable water. In the United States, 2 regions emerged as citrus empires: Florida and California. Florida's citrus industry began in earnest in the early 19th century, when Spanish settlers and later American homesteaders established groves in the central and southern regions of the state. By the late 19th century, Florida oranges were being shipped by rail to northern cities in quantities that made fresh citrus affordable to urban workers for the first time. California's citrus industry developed slightly later, centered on the navel orange, a variety that arrived from Brazil in 1873 when the U.S. Department of Agriculture imported a small number of cuttings. The Washington navel orange, grown from one of those original Brazilian cuttings, became the foundation of the California citrus industry. Every Washington navel orange in existence, every one grown in California, in Australia, in South Africa, in Spain, is a genetic clone descended from that single Brazilian tree. A single cutting that arrived in Riverside, California in 1873 gave rise to one of the most successful agricultural industries in American history. The railroads made it possible. The refrigerated rail car, developed in the 1880s, meant that California oranges could reach New York in edible condition. The result was one of the great economic transformations of 19th-century agriculture. California went from a frontier economy to one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world within a generation. And it changed how Americans thought about their health, their diet, and their bodies. Because here is something remarkable about the history of orange juice specifically. For most of human history, orange juice was not a separate product. You ate oranges, you peeled them and ate them. The idea of squeezing oranges and drinking the juice as a standalone beverage, orange juice as a commodity, as a breakfast staple, as something you buy in a carton, this is entirely a 20th century innovation. In the early 20th century, California citrus growers had a surplus problem. They were producing more oranges than they could sell as fresh fruit. Working with early food scientists and agricultural marketers, the California Fruit Growers Exchange, later known as Sunkist, developed campaigns to encourage consumers to squeeze oranges for juice. They hired advertising agencies, they developed marketing campaigns, they placed recipes in newspapers, they promoted the electric juicer. And then the First World War created an extraordinary opportunity. The U.S. military required portable, shelf-stable forms of vitamin C for soldiers in the field. Someone had by now connected the dots between citrus and vitamin C. The vitamin itself was isolated in 1932, but its importance in preventing scurvy was understood decades earlier. The development of powdered citrus products for military use drove innovation in citrus processing technology. After the war, that technology came home. And after the Second World War, which generated even more innovation in food preservation and processing, orange juice concentrate arrived. Frozen concentrated orange juice, which could be stored indefinitely and reconstituted with water, was introduced to American consumers in 1945. It was a sensation. By the 1960s, orange juice with breakfast was so firmly established as an American cultural norm that it felt ancient, eternal, as if humans had always started the day with a glass of orange juice. They had not. It was a marketing campaign that became a civilization. And now we need to talk about what we sacrificed. Because the industrialization of orange juice is, in miniature, the same story as the industrialization of the tomato, the banana, the wheat, the corn. The story of taking something complex and alive and reducing it to a commodity. Fresh squeezed orange juice from a ripe orange is a remarkable thing. It contains vitamin C in abundance. It contains flavonoids, compounds linked to cardiovascular health. It contains volatile aromatic compounds that produce the complex, bright, floral flavor we associate with orange. It degrades quickly. Within hours, the volatile compounds dissipate. The flavor flattens, the aroma fades. Industrial orange juice is nothing like this. Large-scale orange juice production involves extracting juice from oranges, pasteurizing it to kill bacteria and extend shelf life, stripping out the volatile aromatic compounds because they degrade during storage, and then, when the juice is ready to be packaged and sold, adding those aromatic compounds back in carefully calculated amounts to produce a consistent flavor profile. That flavor profile, the standard, familiar taste of commercial orange juice, was designed in a laboratory. It is consistent across batches and across seasons not because nature made it that way, but because food scientists engineered it that way. The orange trees in Florida and Brazil and Mexico are not producing the juice that tastes like orange juice. They are producing a raw material that gets processed into something that tastes like the flavor chemist's model of what orange juice should taste like. This is not a conspiracy. It is industrial food production doing exactly what it is designed to do: produce a consistent, safe, shelf-stable product at scale. But it is worth knowing. Because what you taste in a carton of commercial orange juice is not primarily what the orange tasted like. It is what the orange juice company decided it should taste like. The contrast with a glass of juice squeezed from a ripe orange at peak season and drunk immediately, the brightness, the complexity, the aromatic lift is not subtle. It is the difference between a photograph of music and the music itself. Where does citrus grow today, and what does that tell us about the modern world? China is the largest producer of all citrus globally, growing roughly 30% of the world's total. Brazil is the largest producer of oranges specifically and the largest exporter of orange juice. The São Paulo state alone produces more orange juice than any other region on Earth. The United States, once the world's largest orange producer, has declined dramatically. Florida's citrus industry has been devastated by a bacterial disease called citrus greening, or huanglangbing, which has no cure and has destroyed roughly 80% of Florida's citrus production over the past 2 decades. Citrus greening arrived in Florida in 2005. It is spread by a tiny insect called the Asian citrus psyllid. The bacterium it carries infects the phloem, the vascular system of the tree, and gradually kills it. Infected trees produce fruit that is small, bitter, and misshapen. There is no treatment. The trees must be removed and destroyed. Within 20 years, an industry that had defined Florida's economy and identity for over a century was on the verge of collapse. Florida produced 240 million boxes of oranges in 1997. By 2022, production had fallen to around 41 million boxes. The decline continues. This is the same vulnerability we have discussed before: monoculture. A vast industry built on a small number of genetically similar varieties, an industry with no resilience against a pathogen it had not encountered before. The Florida orange industry is facing the same existential crisis as the Cavendish banana, as the European grapevine before grafting, as every agricultural monoculture that grows large enough to become a single point of failure. Scientists are working frantically on solutions: genetic modification to introduce disease resistance, new management practices, alternative citrus varieties. But the pattern should be familiar by now. We build, we scale, we optimize, we create systems that are highly efficient and deeply fragile, and then we are shocked when they fail. And they always eventually fail. Now versus then. In the court of Louis XIV, an orange was a symbol of extraordinary wealth. To eat an orange was to announce your status. Today, a bag of oranges costs $2. A child can eat as many as they want. Citrus is available in every supermarket in every country on Earth every day of the year. This is genuine human progress, the democratization of luxury, the work of agricultural technology and global trade making something that was once reserved for kings available to everyone. And yet, the orange Louis XIV was eating, cultivated with extraordinary care, ripened fully on the tree in the warm climate of southern France or shipped from Spain at great expense, was a fundamentally different eating experience from the orange sitting in a bag on the supermarket shelf. His orange was probably smaller, less perfectly shaped, less uniform, but it was ripe, it was complex. It had the full spectrum of flavor that a citrus fruit can produce when it is grown and harvested properly. The orange on the supermarket shelf was likely picked before fully ripe to survive the logistics of industrial transport. It was stored in a cold warehouse, potentially for months. It was waxed to preserve its appearance. It will look perfect, it may taste of very little. The Sun King, for all his wealth and power, could not have the orange of a modern supermarket. He could not have year-round availability, consistent supply, the confidence that he could walk into any room in Europe and find an orange waiting for him. But we, for all our abundance, cannot have the orange he had either. Progress and loss travel together, they always have. What does the story of citrus teach us? The first lesson is about the gap between knowing and doing. James Lind proved in 1747 that citrus prevented scurvy. The British Navy did not act on it for 48 years. This is not an aberration of history, it is the norm. We know that certain diets dramatically reduce the risk of heart disease. Millions of people die from heart disease every year. We know that sleep deprivation affects cognitive function and physical health as dramatically as many diseases. Most people in the industrialized world are chronically sleep deprived. We know that air pollution causes cancer, cardiovascular disease, and reduced cognitive development in children. Most major cities have dangerous levels of air pollution. We know we do not do. The gap between knowledge and action is one of the defining challenges of human civilization. And understanding that gap, not just the knowledge itself, but why knowledge fails to translate into behavior, is one of the most important intellectual tasks available to us. The sailors who died of scurvy between 1747 and 1795 did not die because no one knew the cure. They died because knowledge without institutional action is not enough. Because knowing is necessary but not sufficient. Because the world does not change just because the truth becomes available. It changes when the truth becomes impossible to ignore, when the cost of continuing to ignore it becomes greater than the cost of acting on it. The lesson of citrus and scurvy is the lesson of every preventable tragedy in human history. We wait too long, we always wait too long. And the question each generation has to ask itself is, what do we know right now that we are failing to act on? What is our scurvy? The second lesson is about the relationship between luxury and necessity. Citrus began as an ordinary wild plant in the foothills of the Himalayas. It moved west and became a religious object, a royal luxury, a naval necessity. In the span of human history, the same fruit has been all of these things simultaneously in different places for different people. The etrog in a Jewish prayer ritual, the orange tree in Louis XIV's orangery, the lime juice in a sailor's daily ration, the orange in a child's Christmas stocking. One fruit, infinite meanings. This should remind us that the value we assign to things is not intrinsic. It is assigned, it shifts. It depends on context, on scarcity, on need, on culture. The same object can be sacred, royal, medicinal, quotidian, cheap, and precious, sometimes simultaneously. When we forget this, we mistake the value we have assigned for the value that actually exists. We think something is inherently cheap because we have made it abundant. We think something is inherently precious because we have made it rare. The citrus fruit sits quietly in its bowl on your counter, neither knowing nor caring about its extraordinary history. It was once carried in the hands of a scholar to a place of worship, once cultivated in a king's greenhouse at enormous expense, once hoarded on a ship as the difference between life and death. Now it rolls around at the bottom of a grocery bag, half forgotten. It is the same fruit. We are the ones who changed. A few extraordinary facts to take with you. The bergamot orange, a small, fragrant citrus grown almost exclusively in the Reggio Calabria region of southern Italy, is the source of the characteristic flavor in Earl Grey tea. The oil extracted from the bergamot rind is blended with black tea to create one of the world's most consumed hot beverages. Almost no one who drinks Earl Grey tea knows they are drinking a beverage flavored with a Calabrian citrus fruit. The Sumo citrus, currently one of the most sought-after premium citrus varieties in the United States, sold for several dollars per fruit, is not a new variety. It is a Japanese mandarin hybrid called Decapon, developed in Japan in 1972. It was introduced to the US market in 2011. Its extraordinary sweetness and easy peel skin made it an immediate commercial success. In Japan, a box of premium Decapon can sell for hundreds of dollars as a luxury gift. The world's largest known citrus collection is maintained by the United States Department of Agriculture at its National Clonal Germplasm Repository in Riverside, California. It contains over 1,000 different citrus accessions, varieties and species from around the world preserved as living trees. This collection exists specifically to preserve genetic diversity that might otherwise be lost, and to provide material for breeding new disease-resistant varieties. It is one of the most important and least known living archives on Earth. Citrus sinensis, the sweet orange, is the most cultivated fruit tree in the world. There are more orange trees on Earth than any other fruit tree. The pink grapefruit, which now dominates the commercial grapefruit market, was discovered as a natural mutation in 1907 on a white grapefruit tree in Conner, Texas. One spontaneous mutation. The entire pink and red grapefruit industry grew from that single tree. The word paradise, which we mentioned in the context of Persian gardens, is one of the most traveled words in the English language. from the ancient Persian paradisa through Greek and Latin through French into English. We call the afterlife paradise because the ancient Persians built walled gardens of extraordinary beauty and called them that, the garden as the highest human achievement. The garden, with its carefully tended fruit trees, its irrigation channels, its fragrant and beautiful plants, as the closest humans could come to the divine. And in those original paradise gardens, among the pomegranates and the roses and the flowing water, the citrus trees stood. Fragrant, golden, and ancient. We began with sailors dying in the dark. 2 million of them, dying from the absence of something that should have been simple to provide. Dying because knowledge moved slowly, because theory resisted practice, because institutions are heavy and truth is light. We end with something different. We end with a fruit on your kitchen counter, ordinary and extraordinary in equal measure, the descendant of a wild mountain plant that humans have been carrying around the world for 4,000 years. Carried by Chinese merchants to the imperial court, by Arab traders across the Mediterranean, by Portuguese sailors around the tip of Africa, by Spanish colonists to the Americas, by refrigerated rail car across the American continent, by refrigerated container ship to every corner of the globe. Every orange in your kitchen is the end point of a journey that began in the eastern Himalayas before civilization as we know it existed. It carries in its DNA the choices made by thousands of generations of farmers, traders, and scientists who selected, cultivated, hybridized, and transported it across the world. It carries in its history the deaths of 2 million sailors and the lives of the millions more who were saved when someone finally listened to what the evidence was saying. It carries the fragrance of Persian paradise gardens, the prayers of Jewish scholars, the pride of French kings, the desperation of Arctic explorers. And it sits in your kitchen underneath the grocery receipt next to the car keys, waiting to be noticed. The next time you peel an orange, feel the spray of essential oil against your fingers, smell that particular brightness that has been recognized as extraordinary by every human civilization that ever encountered it. Take 1 extra second. Not to be grateful in a performative way, not to feel obligated to the fruit. Just to notice what it actually is. A 4,000-year journey resting in your hand. The history of human civilization compressed into something round and fragrant and bright. Most of what we call ordinary is simply history we have forgotten to read. The citrus fruit is history you can hold and eat. And let remind you, if you are willing to be reminded, that the world you inhabit was built by people who carried things, knowledge, seeds, cures, seeds of understanding, across distances that should have been impossible. They carried them anyway. Because they understood, perhaps, what we sometimes forget. That the small things we carry with us, the things we tend and share and refuse to leave behind, are the things that keep us alive.